And that passes unanimously. Next, we have 2017-0263, an ordinance to approve and authorize the execution of a lease agreement between St. Charles Parish and Gator Cove Marina II, LLC, for a Westbank boat launch. Mr. Dwayne Foray is not here tonight. Who will be him? Mr. Darren Dewey.
Thank you. What you have in front of you is an ordinance for a Westbank boat launch. It will be leasing from Gator Cove Marina II. It's a 30-year lease. It's on the. I'll answer any questions you have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dewey. We're going to need a motion and a second to accept the revised version of the lease for 2017-0263. We have a motion by Mr. Gibbs on the revision and a second by Ms. Benedetto. Please cast your votes on the revised version. And that passes unanimously. 2017-0263 is now open for a public hearing. If there's anyone who would like to come up and speak on behalf of this item, please do so now and state your name and address for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Milton Alamo Hornville. This is a lease for a boat launch facility, including 33 acres. Do we have 33-acre boat launches anywhere else in this parish? And the total amount of money, guys, $4,500 a month. For 30 years, it comes up to about right under $2 million with the built-in price increases. Once again, another $2 million over the next 30 years that will not be put on our levees and our drainage infrastructure. If this is the lease for the property, we still got to build the boat launch. We still got to maintain the boat launch. And as of right now, I know there's another part of this coming with it soon, but as of right now, we're going to lease property from a gentleman that if you look at the drawings in your book, he doesn't even have access to his property unless he uses someone else's servitude. That's what it seems to be. I don't think this is the way we ought to be going. I don't think we ought to be spending $2 million on a boat launch when we have more pressing issues. It just, and I'll be perfectly honest with you, of the 53,000 people in St. Charles Parish, I'm one of those 45,000 that don't own a boat. I'm also one of 45,000 plus, or maybe less, maybe I should say less, that don't even fish. So for me to be the authority on how bad we need a boat launch, I would not be your person. But if you ask me, again, and I keep telling you the three most important things in St. Charles Parish today, and one of them is drainage, flood protection. Think about what's going on in Houston, guys. That could happen here. And we're willing to spend, this governing body is willing to spend $2 million over the next 30 years. 30 years, that's even longer than what the 20-year millage is for funding our levies. This makes no sense. This is a bad deal. To get to the property y'all looking to lease, we got to go through Jefferson Parish. Please don't do this. If we got this kind of extra money sitting around in general funds or wherever, put it where it needs to be, and that's infrastructure for drainage and flood control. This is a bad deal. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Allen, 2017-0263 is still open for public hearing. If there's anyone else in the audience who would like to come up and speak on behalf of this item, please do so now. State your name.
Bruce McDonald, 316 Willowdale Boulevard. I had a copy of the contract and had a chance to look at it, and from the very beginning thought that it was a not too good of a deal. According just like Mr. Alamo, I thought it was overpriced as far as servitude access, $4,500 a month for 30 years, with a consumer price index every 5 years to be readjusted. Sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. If it goes down 1%, that's $45. All right, no big deal. But in every 5 years, the council puts out $270,000, and in 30 years, y'all going to put out $1.6 million. Why not have this property bought by St. Charles Parish to where it's ours? I applaud you for getting a boat launch. Wendy, you know how enthusiastic, Julia, Billy, y'all all know how enthusiastic I am about, Paul, about getting this boat launch. There are so many people on this side of the river and on the other side that need boat launches. We need one in DeSalmons, we need one in Bayagosh, we need one here. We need boat launches, but to pay this amount of money, and in 30 years, somebody could walk up and say, all right, lease is up, get off my property. I have one question. Is it legal to spend taxpayer money on private property? Anybody?
We would have a lease, so it would be legal.
So it would be legal?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the price would have to come from negotiations with the council and the lease, or not the leasee.
The lessee would pay for
Right.
the improvements
Okay.
on the leased property, if that's what you're asking.
Okay. From the, I see that there's been a revised edition of the contract. The picture I have of the diagram of the boat launch shows that only 49 vehicles and trailers can be parked on this 33 acres. Being involved with the Louisiana High School bass fishing, we have been averaging 130 boats a tournament. If we would try to put on a tournament, where would we go? Where do we have to go? The only place is Bayou Sonnet. We have to leave this parish. We have one of the most distinguished people in the state of Louisiana living in Luling, Mr. Kevin Gobert, who is the president of the Bass Association for the state. He goes to tournaments all over the place. He can tell you how important it is, or the economic impact a world-class boat launch would mean to St. Charles Parish, right here in Louisiana. I remember Kevin Van Dam, after winning the 2011, stated, take care of this area, take care of this lake. He wants to come back. They haven't been back. There's no place in St. Charles Parish.
Excuse me, Mr. McDonald, we're going to have to take a motion to extend your time. I have a motion by Mr. Woodruff and a second by Mr. Gibbs to give you additional time. We have to vote on it. Could you please cast your votes on extending Mr. McDonald's time? And that passes unanimously.
Thank you, Council. So what I'm saying is, I think this is a bad deal as far as us putting out this amount of money. 1.6 million in the final tabulation, if that's what the Consumer Price Index allows the council to pay in 30 years. To me, it's a lot of money. I really think that it could be spent a lot better. I just wish and hope that the council makes the right decision on this. We do need a boat launch. You don't know how excited, not just high school bass fishing, but what about your duck hunters and your sac-a-lait fishermen and your cat fishermen, your commercial fishermen? A facility on the side would be great for us. We all want one, big time. I had a lot of friends who planned to come tonight, but because of the weather and working and everything, they couldn't make it. So there's a lot of people, they call me and they always say to me, Bruce, when are we getting a boat launch? I'm not the one. I can only tell them what goes on, you know. And I try to keep in touch with a lot of people, I really do. Not one person came to me and asked me, what do we need as far as a boat launch with this? Not one. I came 6 years ago when we had 400,000, we had 12 acres ready to go, and it was all taken away because we had permits. And like Mr. Toste told me at the end, he says, Bruce, I didn't think we had that many people that fished in St. Charles Parish. Huh? Come on now. Drive around in each subdivision, and look at the boats in people's driveways. There are plenty. Okay? If we flooded, I guarantee you we wouldn't have the problem Houston has. We could all paddle away. I promise you. But please, I think this is a bad deal. I think not let it go away, table it, let's do some more research. There could be government procurement for property. That's a procedure that you people can use. I think it ought to be an avenue to be explored. I think there's property out there, but it just needs to be looked at. Thank you all for the time. Call me if you need me.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Public 2017-0263 still open for public hearing. If anyone else would like to come up and speak on behalf of this item, please do so now. State your name, address for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Kevin Gobert, 603 Terry Drive, Luling. I was really excited to hear that we were moving forward with the boat launch, but I want to make sure that this is the best option for the anglers, the fishermen, and hunters that's going to be using this property. As far as location and the $4,500 a month, will it be a fee to launch? How's that money going to be collected, the $4,500? And then the location, and I briefly looked at a map, but I'm curious, would it be prone to flooding? You know, what side of the locks is it on? If it's going to be on the south side, then there may be times where it may be flooding, you may not be able to use it. So again, we're long overdue for a launch in this parish. It's been years. The economic impact studies that we've done, St. Charles Parish is missing out on tons of money. Anglers in this parish leave our parish to go fish. They'll go to buy a signet and run back to the Zalmans or Bayagosh to go fishing because we don't have a decent launch. So again, there's other organizations that would be glad to come to Louisiana. If you, over the years, we've had Bassmaster Classic tournaments here, top 150. So even those large organizations know the fisheries we have around here and would love to come. We just have no place that we can manage that amount of boats. So I just want to make sure we're putting the money in the best place that it's good for everybody. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gobert. 2017-0263 still open for public hearing. Does anyone else would like to come up and speak on behalf of this item? Please do so now. State your name, address for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Name is Raymond Fonseca. Address is Bayou des Allemands. Commercial fisherman is the occupation. For safety and safety alone, I will address you all. When the waves in the lake get that high, this is a safety outlet that puts them this high. If you save a life, you have done wonders. As far as the fishing goes, my type of fishing is different than everybody else's. The boat launch brings us to fishing, hunting, and everything else. The boat launch is needed. You all have to decide what to do with this one, so here's your chance. Deal with it.
Okay, Ms. Fonseca, thank you. 2017-0263 still open for public hearing. Please state your name and address for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Yes, sir. Barry Gilliott, 341 Marcia Drive in Luling. You know, we're all friends here. We all enjoy the outdoors. We're looking for the best option. And when we're looking at I think it's all about access. First of all, it's access where do we launch it? And then if it's privately owned waterways, how are other people not going to put up gates to allow us to go through once we build something? You know, I mean, the place where we're looking at right now is off Highway 90. It's very safe. The boat launch is outside of the gates like Bonneville, like Signet. You know, it's higher. I took a ride out there today. Pier 90, the water's coming up into the parking lot right now. Where we drove, you could go have a picnic out there because it's so high above sea level right there. I'm shaking a little bit nervous. But when we talk about access for that, but then we also talk about the 33 acres. I mean, when I'm looking at where they're talking about, they have a canal and the bayou right there. And I mean, God, there's just and so many opportunities for recreation there, for education, and for, you know, just getting the families out there. 33. Now, and I know when I first started, it was $4,500 a month, you know, but then when you start looking at it and you start thinking about, you know, I had some experience with Wetland Watchers Park, and Wetland Watchers Park, as wonderful as it is, has a lot of challenges, you know, with the road getting there and stuff like that. And, you know, I mean, sometimes, you know, it costs some to get that road done on top of the levee there, and I'm praying that sometime in the next year that we have a real asphalt road back there. This one has no problems with access. I understand that we're going to have a good you know, the Jefferson Parish and that, you know, we've talked to them, and there's going to be no problem having that short to the little bridge going over. But I mean, it's really ideal for development into a recreational park there. And I do foresee in the future having some type of cabins there where we can make it sustainable, having a, you know, when we go forward with all the partners and we get some of the things built out there, have conference rooms, you know, where you know, we're having it make some of that money back. So, I mean, I think it's a really good opportunity, and I understand what everybody's saying, but when you're looking at what is available there, who's going to sell their property, who's going to allow us to go through there? What if we go get all this together and get it, and then they decide they're going to put a fence up across the bayou right there? Because unfortunately, Louisiana allows people to do that on some of them. But here we have access straight out to some of the best fishing. Some of the wildlife protected areas are out there. I mean, it's just so close, and it's all about access. And then we talk about access for a public. I mean, we're going to have accessible boardwalks for them to go through. It's a whole nother ecosystem that is out by the lake, you know, to come over here and have all those projects for the schools. We have schools from all the different parishes taking trips to this park and the other park and seeing two different things. So I am in support of, based on all the options that I've seen, I think that the Savoy property is our best option. And I do think that one day they can be sustainable. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Gadd. 2017-0263 still open for public hearing. Please state your name and address for the record, sir, and you have 3 minutes to speak.
Yes, Brian Landry, 240 Dunleave, Deschamps, Louisiana. I'm actually wearing a CCA jacket, but a lot of you people also know me as a volunteer for Ducks Unlimited. We hold events out here. Ducks Unlimited just recently purchased with Wildlife and Fisheries a little over 1,500 acres and donated back. This launch that we're talking about here would give access to that for the duck hunters. Also the fishermen. This entire project, as a resident of St. Charles Parish for 26 years, getting a boat in the water is very difficult out here. And like Mr. Gilliard said, this is probably the best option that I've seen. Working on the conservation side, being out on the water. I was just out at 90 a week ago launching a boat out there, and there was only 2 of us. There was 2 of us fighting to get in, and it's flooded, like it's flooded today. So this option, like Mr. Gilliard's talking about, it is raised. The educational opportunities out there, like what we're doing out at the Wetland Watchers Park. I know a lot of you know that we had that Green Wing event we had scheduled for this weekend. Well, we had to cancel it because of the weather. But with that, our Ducks Unlimited Green Wing Day has become, we broke a record when we held that out here at the Wetland Watchers Park. 400 some odd kids, became a regional now format for how to hold these events. In the past, Ducks Unlimited events for the kids to bring them out into nature happened in gyms, in Cabela's. We were able to bring them out to the park. Now that is in our region, the Wetland Watchers Park and their Green Wing event. Now they've canceled all other Ducks Unlimited events for kids in different regions and different chapters, and they're telling them to come to this event in this location. Like Mr. Gilliard said, it is difficult getting back there, and there are issues at times. Like when the tide was coming in, that viaduct was flooded, so that was our biggest concern about this weekend besides the weather, was getting people in and out of there. This location, I've looked at the map, I've seen the plans. We would love We would love to hold events there. We could co-op with the CCA. I've talked with them about CCA, Ducks Unlimited. We want to do, kayak fishing, teaching these kids kayak fishing, launching, doing boat and fishing tournaments. It's just not conducive with what we have now. This type of setup with both a park for education, a big enough area for us to have an event. We could bring events here, make them regional for both Ducks Unlimited and the CCA. So those are my thoughts on it. I think it would be a great thing. We, as outdoorsmen, been looking for this for a long, long time, and that's my piece on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Landry. Okay, 2017-0263 still open for public hearing. Please state your name and address for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Okay, Craig Howitt, Hanville. Thank you for having us here tonight. I'll basically say I would like for y'all to think about the support of this ordinance. I've heard several times mentioned tonight location, location, location. You've heard that. But I'd like to kind of go back on our founding fathers. The founding fathers, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This allows us to pursue happiness. I am also a non-boat owner. I don't have access to a boat. But as a 20-year educator, I do know that those kids that we bring back there to have them experience swamp school, we bring back for Wetland Watchers events, those kids will one day be the taxpayers who are going to vote for those levies. So I totally see the big picture, and I think by looking at that big picture, and I hope you all see that big picture, that these kids, as they get out to these recreational opportunities, are going to one day be the people that are going to vote for us to continue to protect our culture, to protect our area. So please support that ordinance. I'd also like to challenge the board to continue to think about those partnerships with the Louisiana Wildlife and Fisheries, to think about Department of Culture, Recreation, and Tourism, and to build those partnerships. As a 20-year educator and also at the Satellite Center, those partnerships are vital and important. And, to see our students building the signs and doing fundraisers to raise funds for those nature trails, we know the government doesn't always have the money. But when kids are involved, they're creative and they work passionately to do those things. So I think that's also a good thing. And also what Mr. Fonseca said about safety, this is one of those opportunities to have access to be able to get over that flood structure. So, just another plus. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Howard. Public hearing on 2017-0263 still open. If there's anyone who'd like to come up and speak on behalf of this item, please do so now. Seeing none, public hearing is closed. Council discussion, Mr. Paul Hogan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So let's go over this, and please let me know if I get any of these facts wrong. Why did we, or at least I, just learn about this proposed launch on Highway 90 at the last council meeting when it was introduced, when it was in the works since last January? This is to lease 34 acres of half marshland and half levee and levee servitude area for $30,000 for 30 years at $45,000 a month. That's $54,000 a year, $1.6 million a year over the lease. $4,500 is $130 per acre. How was this value derived from marshland and levee servitude acreage? Was an appraisal performed? If not, then we need one before we spend this type of crazy money on this lease. The property was bought by the prior owner for $200 an acre in 2009. That puts the 34-acre site valued at about $6,800. Just the proposed first month and a half's payment equals to what the property is worth. That puts this lease amount into some sort of perspective. This does not add up. How much did the Corps pay for the permanent levee servitude? That should be a good measurement stick as to the value of what is a reasonable lease amount should be based upon. GCR says that marshland is worth about $500 to $1,500 an acre. At $1,500 an acre, it's worth $50,000. This lease pays more than that in just the first year. Just think about that. Now, if it was a developed boat launch site, then $4,500 would be reasonable, but it ain't. Y'all need to really think about what the taxpayers would be getting for $4,500 a month. This is not justifiable. The following is what my research and information provided to me in the last 2 weeks shows. A conceptual plan for the 34-acre site was developed in January. The parish had a survey performed in April. A proposed phase 1 plan for a small part of the site was developed in June, and a cost estimate for this phase one was developed in July. And you know this all had to be done with the blessing of the previous owner. So the cost estimate for this phase one is just over $1 million. It's safe to say that the future phases will cost at least another $2 to $3 million on top of the $1 million for this phase. Are we ready and willing to commit the taxpayers to this lease, to phase one, to this boat launch project that will cost over $4 million in the end when all is said and done? The taxpayers can rest assured that I will not vote to stick them with this. There are so many unanswered questions. Can we build within the perpetual flood levy servitude that takes up half of the lease? Can we get permission to cross the levee and build on the levee berms as proposed? Do we want to spend significant taxpayer dollars on improvements on the flood side of the levee, which will then be susceptible to flooding and flood damage? The biggest question is there a better site than this? Has other sites for this desperately needed boat launch been looked at? If yes, where and how did the sites compare to this proposal? We as stewards of the taxpayers' money owe it to the taxpayers that we know this before we jump off this cliff. If other alternatives have not been looked into, which I know one firsthand, which this administration did not look into, then due diligence is required by us and this administration to do so before we put the taxpayer dollars into a bad deal like this. Regarding the lease, the prior owner working with the parish for this has been working in the parish with this for months. One would expect to see a lease in front of us with the prior owner, but they are one of our fellow council members and her husband. Ethics laws, however, prevents the participation in this lease transaction involving the parish, since there would be a personal substantial and economic interest. So it appears that a plan was developed to get a new owner. A company called Gator Cove Marina was formed and registered with the Secretary of State in May, apparently for this purpose. The property was purchased just 3 weeks ago, on August the 10th, by Gator Cove Marina, whose manager and owner is the nephew of the fellow council member's husband, for $100 plus other valuable consideration. It was recorded on August 11th, and this lease ordinance was introduced 4 days later on August 14th at our last council meeting, apparently all pre-planned. There was no time to negotiate a lease with the new owner and have it introduced within 4 days of it being purchased, which included a weekend. I know that you all read the lease, and you know that if we were to build a launch here, the owner in a short 30 years can simply say, thanks for the launch, I don't wish to renew the lease, see y'all later. Should the terms and conditions of lease renewal not be negotiated between the two parties, we would be without a boat launch once again, and the taxpayers would be out millions of dollars. We cannot take that risk. I cannot vote to take that risk. We need to build on property we own or property that we lease at a fair market value for 99 years or more. $4,500 a month is simply not a fair market value. If this were the only site available, which I know firsthand it is not, then the right thing to do on behalf of the taxpayers would be to expropriate the property for public use, should the owner not wish to sell it to the parish for its fair market value. On behalf of the taxpayers, I strongly urge my fellow council members not to move forward with this item that was dropped on us 2 weeks ago. We first need to know if there is a better land option available. If there are none, then we need to expropriate this property and any other property needed to access it. Its fair market value is probably about $50,000, which is 1 year's lease payment. When compared to $4,500 a month, expropriating it would save the taxpayers $270,000 in the first 5 years, $500,000 in the first 10 years, $1 million in 20 years, and $1.5 million over the proposed 30-year lease. On behalf of the taxpayers that we represent, I strongly urge each of you not to approve this lease. Please do not take our taxpayers to the cleaners. And should the council ignore all of this and approve this lease, then I ask that the parish president veto this ordinance if it passes on behalf of the taxpayers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hogan. Any other council members comment, discussion? Okay, Mr. Cochran.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Danny, could you come to the podium, please? We had Danny and his company look at all the properties, starting at the hump, coming all the way toward Pier 90. Could you give us an overview of what you found, Danny?
Thank you, Mr. President. Danny Hebert, Civil Environmental Consulting Engineers, One American Place in Luling. Thank you. There's a borrow canal that parallels Highway 90. You're familiar with it, from the overpass near the Davis diversion up to the parish line towards Avondale. That Borough Canal is crisscrossed with multiple private property owners. On the surface, a boat launch along that corridor may look appealing and attractive in 2 or 3 areas that have already been filled. However, there, as you know, if you keep up with some of the private property issues in the state involving water bottoms, there are over 20 pending permits with the Corps right now, whereas a private landowner can actually gate off a canal or a water body that has historically been subject to title exchange. That limits your ability to look at sites on the eastern end of the parish. You essentially have to be, without issue at least, on Bayou Verret, which is the canal that runs from the existing boat launch, also abuts this proposed site and runs into Lake Cotahuachi, Lake Salvador, and the entire upper Barataria-Terrebonne estuary. We have a notification from the State Land Office that those water bottoms from the proposed site to Lake Cotahuachi and beyond are public, considered public. So therefore, one of the concerns that we would have on the Borough Canal at the other sites that we looked at would be someone downstream could potentially gate off access to the lake. They cannot do that, in my opinion, and the opinion of the State Land Office on this particular water body, which is a natural feature. Additionally, there's been a couple of comments about elevation. The elevation of the existing boat launch, which is in disrepair and needs to be completely replaced, it does vary, but it's as low as 0.7 in some of the areas that flood just when there's a strong south wind. The sector gate, as Mr. Fauché explained to me earlier, has to be closed at 1.7, which means that when you have a high tide or a strong south wind, or even a tropical event like now, the sector gate will be closed and the boat launch that currently exists will not be usable. However, at the proposed site, the existing elevation varies from +3 to 6. It's been previously impacted by a prior project in the levee construction, the sector gate construction. There's also an HS-20 loaded access bridge to get to the site. So the site has some positives. Mr. Hogan did ask some questions that honestly cannot be answered until you get to the permitting process. So assuming that this site is selected by this council, the first thing that we would recommend you do is go to the permitting process with all the various agencies and flesh out a practical design that would minimize wetlands impact, which would also minimize your cost. And it may also alter some of the design features that we did in the master plan. Someone mentioned earlier about the 49 proposed parking spaces. You can have, that was only on the south side of the levee system. If you want to have additional parking on the north side of the levee system, you could also do that. It really all depends on if there's grants available, if the funding is available for you to do additional mitigation, additional permitting. I'm going to, if I could at this time, Julie Hebert with Coastal Permitting has done quite a bit of communication and discussions with some of the agencies that may have some funding. And if you don't mind, I'd like to turn over to her.
Yes, please. Julie?
Good evening, Julie Hebert. That's a hard act to follow. So Julie Hebert, Coastal Permitting, One American Place, Luling, Louisiana. We too are very excited about the possibility of a boat launch in St. Charles Parish of this magnitude. And it has been a long time coming, and I think it's safe to say that we live in a parish where a lot of people are outdoorsmen and outdoorswomen. And it also ties into the educational system. I think there are many people who have spoken today from the educational side, as well as wetlands watchers, Ducks Unlimited / CCA, I know Brian is involved in both of those, and he spoke about wanting to bring regional events. But the great things about those associations, they don't just bring the people, they bring funding, and they bring large corporations that match funding. They have partnerships that promote youth education for outdoor activities, wildlife, nature, conservation. All those things tie into some of the other things that we're trying to do as a community, which is to keep kids and people from becoming addicts. We have the opioid addiction problem in our community, and the more kids we can get out to a wetland watchers park, to go kayak fishing, to get involved in a green wing organization, to learn about the outdoors, they have a place to go and to recreate. And statistics show kids who love the outdoors, they don't fall back to watching things inappropriately on phones, seeing if they can mimic it, and going out and buying drugs. So those organizations are great organizations, not only for the involvement with the community, but for the funding as well. Additionally, I've talked to some of their executive directors who have committed that they would like to be involved in this. And involvement also means financial donations. But most importantly, as of August 18th, there was a deadline that we get put on the short list for a project to get funding from CIPRA. We all know who they are. They're the guys that have $60 million that came from BP, and they have a fund specific to recreational uses. And of the 60,000, 21 has been accounted for, but that leaves 39 million. I said million. That leaves 39 million still available. I went out and I approached the executive director, who is Mike Ellis. I had confirmation from his office that we did meet the requirements. We are on the short list, so we will be considered for supplemental funding through the BP oil spill money. The reason for that is that we are connected to the Barataria Basin. If there is ever any type of an emergency, we can get boats out, whether it's recreational, life and rescue, all the way from Grand Isle on up through the Barataria Basin, can come out in St. Charles Parish. Our parish sheriff already uses this site, albeit archaic, to launch his search and rescue missions when there are people trapped out in Catawatchee who can't get back behind the sector gate. So if someone's missing, that's where they throw their boats in. It's a good site based on where it's located, because you don't want to launch on the north side of the sector gate, because when it closes, people are stranded and trapped. And you can get a boater's permit at the age of 12. If you have 14-year-old boys out there that all of a sudden realize, hey, tide's high, south wind, and they're trapped, that's a crisis situation, and we don't want to encourage that. And that's about it. The deadline is over. We're on the approved list for potential funding, and it's site-specific, and this is the site that they approved. If I can answer anything else, that's about all I know at this time. Yes, Billy? Yeah, Billy.
How long does it take to get the permits?
That would vary based on what the agencies require. As Danny spoke to, much of the site has been impacted already because they have the sector gate and all of the construction that has gone on out there. But if we would have to encroach into wetlands, and we are within a buffer zone of the sector gate, so we have to have permission from the Department of Army Corps of Engineers for the completed works section, but that's a letter that goes out to them, and it goes through the process. It's hard to tell. They would have to ask us, what information they would need, and then we could tell better once we submit, but we haven't submitted yet.
So if on average, about how long does it take?
It can be, I hate that with permitting agencies. We just had a major hurricane. You just don't know. The Corps of Engineers, they're going to work at the pace depending on the workload and where they get pulled. So I can't really give you a specific, but usually, within a year.
Okay, but if we're getting this lease, we're paying a lease for 1 year with no ramp.
Yeah, I'm not involved in the lease.
So you're going to be paying a lease for 1 year, and we don't have a permit yet. That's $54,000 we lose. And then just this afternoon, it was brought to my attention that an attorney who spoke to somebody for me said that Mr. Marcello was willing to donate the land at Pier 90 to the parish. I haven't seen the old lease, so I don't know what the old lease is on there, but I don't know what kind of deal that would have been, but just something to maybe look at.
Yeah, Bill, as you know, I don't have anything to do with the lease stipulations. That would be legal.
Okay, we had, yeah, because I got Ms. Cluley.
If I could just add one thing about the permit, we would typically expect a 6-month process to as much as a year. If there are issues that would negatively impact the master plan, that would make this not a feasible project. We were not involved in the lease agreement. That was between the parish and the Gator Cove folks. But we did ask that there be a stipulation in the lease agreement that if there are any permitting issues or any permits that are not received in a reasonably timely fashion, that the lease have the opportunity to be canceled. And as I understand it, that language is in there. Is that correct?
Okay, Ms. Cluley?
Thank you, Chairman. Could you, Ms. Hebert, explain one of the reasons why the 30 years was made a point to be included in the lease?
In speaking with CIPRA and with the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, their financial folks, they said that typically they like to see, they consider long-term leases in the 30-year range with renewable options. So I passed that along to the administration, and it's my understanding that that's kind of the way the lease was developed. I don't know. The first I saw the lease is in the agenda.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Hebert, can you also confirm whether or not the Ray Brand property was included in the other properties that you researched as possible locations?
That was one of the private property areas that I talked about earlier that could be subject to, if gating, potentially gating, and if not gating, some sort of a leverage position over the parish in order to allow the public to cross that property.
All right, thank you. And just to expand a little bit as to the recent transfers of property, the reason why it was delayed for so long was there was no reason to transfer it if the parish wasn't going to go forward with the lease. And so that's why all that was delayed until the more recent time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Cluley. Any other council discussion? Mr. Paul Hogan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, this land is the only land available, then we have no choice in getting this property. Then we need to get about whatever means possible, but not by leasing it, by expropriating it. We have that power to take any land that's for a public need. To purchase this property would cost no more than $50,000. That's 1 year's lease. To do anything other than that is throwing our taxpayers' dollars away. I strongly urge y'all not to do that to the taxpayers of our parish that's elected us up here to be good stewards of their money. So I'm sure that the parish president looked at all possibilities that was out there, and we should have that information at our disposal to see that this is the only deal and the best deal out there. Mr. Parish President, can you tell us all the other properties that you looked at and why no other properties?
I think Mr. Danny explained it to you already, Mr. Hogan, and there really isn't any other property because of the gated access that we've learned about that's been upheld by the Supreme Court.
And I understand that argument. The problem is Mr. Ray Brandt owns the property just on the opposite side of the canal of Pier 90. I know the prior administration was working with Mr. Ray Brandt to try to work out a deal, but Sonny Vial, for some reason, stopped it in midstream. Ray Brandt doesn't even know why they stopped it.
From what we learned, and this is all hearsay, that Mr. Brandt couldn't come to terms with the administration.
It never got to that point. I spoke with Mr. Brandt.
Well,
I'm telling you, I spoke with Mr. Brandt's representative that's worked with them.
So it's all hearsay, Paul.
Well, I'm saying, if it's hearsay, then you needed to run that rabbit out and go find out, not just come up here with this lease tonight.
No,
Okay, hold on, gentlemen. I know this is your second time me speaking, but we debating back and forth.
That's why I say I have the floor.
Okay.
You know, I spoke with Mr. Ray Brandt's representative, and he's willing to sell that property. He says he has no personal attachment to it. Whatever the fair market value is, he'll sell that property. So it's right on the Sellers Canal. We have access to it. There's no way anybody can block off the access to that property. So before we move forward with this, we need to see if that property that's right up against the highway, which is on the protected side of the floodgate that will protect our parish infrastructure, we need to see if we can make a deal with Mr. Ray Brandt to acquire that property and put our money in land that we own before we go into a deal like this with a lease for $4,500 a year, a month that we're getting nothing out of it. Y'all really need to think about that before y'all vote this, and we need to ask the parish president to take that step before we vote on that. And with that, I make a motion that we table this tonight so that Mr. Parish President can meet with Mr. Ray Brandt and see if there's a way that we can acquire that property that would be better serving to our parish.
I got a motion by Mr. Hogan and a second by Mr. Woodruff. I still had Mr. Cochran up to speak for his second time. Mr. Cochran?
Real quick.
Huh?
I have a
Yeah,
couple things
this
that
is
I'd
your
like to-
second.
No, but, no, I want to comment on that, but I have other things to say. Oh, I'm
Well,
sorry.
we've already closed public hearing. We had council discussion. I have a motion and a second to table it. So I wanted to give you your second opportunity since you had spoken once already.
Well, mine is, I don't want to take my second opportunity to respond to that. So. Right.
Okay, well, look, okay, I got the motion by Mr. Hogan, the second by Mr. Woodruff to table. Please cast your votes. And the motion to table fails with Ms. Benedetto, nay, Ms. Cluley, nay, Mr. Gibbs, nay, Ms. Fletcher, nay, and Ms. Fisher, nay, and 3 yeas, Mr. Hogan, myself, and Mr. Woodruff. So it fails to table it. Okay, Mr. Cochran, you could proceed to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In response to what Mr. Hogan was saying, the canal bottom could still be cut off with Mr. Brandt's, because it's on, yes. The Gator Cove could cut it off and charge us to go across it. They could. So we vetted all the properties. We did. We worked hard on this thing, very, very hard. I shared it with the council. Mr. Hogan, I offered to meet with you prior to this meeting. I've met with all of you prior to this meeting to discuss this, because it is a lot of money. It is. But it's no more than what we're doing on the East Bank. You know, we have something on the East Bank called Wetland Watchers Park. We don't have a road going to it. It costs us a lot of money to get buses back there. It costs us a lot of money to grade out. We had to buy a special road grader for the levee. It's no different from what we're doing on the East Bank, okay? It's just, this is not going to take that much maintenance at all. What this administration is asking for is 2 back-down ramps, and that's it. Just a road to get to it. The road's already there. We just got to maintain the road, which isn't as long as what we're dealing with on the East Bank. Ducks Unlimited, CCA, and a host of a number of other organizations want to come to the table and support this effort. There's a number of ways we could pay for it down the line, okay? Right now, we don't have anything on the East Bank, West Bank of this parish to launch. We don't. We have to go all the way to Bayou Gauche to launch a boat. Along with this one, we're going to pursue Mr. Hogan's launch at WPA Road and see if we can get that up and going again as well. So that'll give us 2 launches if we're able to bring everything up to fruition. This one here, other than a couple permits, we're ready to go. The most important thing with this one is we can save the town of Ama when we get a southern wind. When the wind starts blowing, Billy, you ought to know more than anybody, now Mary. When we get a wind out the south, we have to close the gates, or we try to keep the gates as open long as possible when we have fishermen out there. We keep them open as long as we can until we start encroaching on Highway 90. We start encroaching on Highway 90, Mr. Fauché may want to add to this, but we have to close the gate. What's starting to happen is we're going to have to take over this gate one day. We have station someone out there and open and close the gate to get their vessel through. And this is going to be costly to this parish. The bottom sill on that gate is starting to wear now. And as we continue to do this, it's going to get worse and worse. So we're going to place the, excuse me, I'm hoarse tonight. We're going to place the launch on the south side of the gate, okay, along with some parking. And then, as Mr. Gobert said, it's not a lot of parking, it's not, Kevin, but we do have a lot of room to expand on the north side of the levee to park. It's, like I said, 30 acres. So we have a lot of room to expand. And then if we have CCA, Ducks Unlimited, possibly some of the plants come forth, and then if Wildlife and Fisheries build what they said they would build years ago, this could be a world-class site. World-class. Mr. McDonald, I see you shaking your head, but it could be. Yes, it could be.
Can I make a comment on that?
Ne- negative. No, you can't.
This is the perfect place to do it. It truly is. And we, you know, it's going to cost us some money. No doubt, it is. But it's no different from what we're paying on the East Bank. It truly isn't. And it's time for the West Bankers to have a nice place to launch a boat. You know, what they're launching now, they're tearing up their hulls, they're tearing up their trailers just to go fishing. And this place here, the launch will be built correctly. It will be built to specs. We have pictures. Do you have the pictures, Anthony, on the thing? Could you show the pictures real quick, please? There's the south side. Go back. The south side is at the bottom. Go back, Anthony, please. That's where the launch would be, okay? And that height is, Danny, what, 5?
3 to 6.
3 to 6 feet up in that area right there, okay? And that would be our first mode of parking, okay? The other side, Kevin, as I was pointing out to Mr. Hebert, on the other side, go back, Anthony, please. On the other side, go to the north side. We could park trailers and boats on that side. Also, we would like to put, you know, a fishing pier along that side too, right up.
No, it's auto. Sorry, it's auto.
On the north side, we'd like to put a fishing pier where people that don't have boats, they can come enjoy it as well. Okay, now show the pictures of the one you kept going to.
Yeah, sorry. It was auto.
That's all right. This is a picture of high tide, southern wind blowing, where we'd be launching boats. Okay, right there. You see how high that is? It's dry. It's all dry. And that is water. Now, Anthony, click over to Highway 90. This is the same day.
Gate is closed in these pictures.
So that's the gate closed, I'm sorry. The gate closed too right there. So if the gate was open a little bit more, we'd have water on Highway 90. And we vetted this process for a year. There's been a lot of work done on this piece of property. We've heard the people of the West Bank loud and clear they want a boat launch on the West Bank. And we truly feel that this is the best place. If I could get it for free, I'd take it for free, okay? Nobody up and down there wants to give it to me for free. Pier 90, you know, go back to where we flooding on Highway 90, Anthony, please. There you go. You see the water encroaching on that building? That building's been flooded numerous times. We'll put that building back in commerce by putting the boat launch over on that side. The gentleman that owns Pier 90 could really do something with that building now, because it won't flood. It's going to give us parking, it's going to give us everything we need, and yes, it's going to cost $4,500 a month, it is. But we pay that, maybe more, I don't know the exact figures. Mr. Fauché couldn't get everything. Would you like to add to what you do on the East Bank, Mr. Fauché, real quick?
When Mr. Cochran asked me to take a look at the East Bank, the Wetland Watch Report, I was involved in 2005 when this was a thought, and we had many of the same people came to the council and couldn't believe that the council would vote to enter into agreement with the Pontchartrain Levy District to accept that property and start a park there. As you can see, somebody's vision came true, with especially with the amount of industry. I don't think when that vision was started that Dow Chemical would have thought about putting a comfort center there, as long as the other contributions. But you know, somebody started with a vision. It took seed, and now you have what you have there today. But it doesn't come without cost. We had to spend approximately $140,000 in a road grader to maintain the levee top. That doesn't include the limestone through the years that's been put there. The numerous amounts of riprap that we've brought there in order to expand the base. We recently built a cove there with pieces of concrete that we've collected throughout the parish. We're getting ready to spend approximately $90,000 to re-sheet pile the pier there. There was a donation of $25,000 to reconcrete the pier, which has not been finished because we were waiting for the sheet piles to come in so that we could finish that sheet pile and then put some tiebacks so that they could concrete on top of that. The only point is that all of this does come with a cost, whether it's internal or external. Nothing is for free, but somebody started with a vision. And you've seen some of the educators who came up here that have led that, especially Mr. Gilliard, who's been recognized nationwide for some of his videos and programs that they've put on there. This could definitely be a duplication of that process on the West Bank in that area. We don't pay anything a month there.
We also invested over $1 million out there, though.
Okay, gentlemen, look, I had two folks up, Ms. Fletcher and Mr. Billy Raymond, and they changed their minds. So we need to, if we got any more council discussion, let's hear it. If not, let's call for a vote.
Billy?
Okay, you didn't come up on the screen.
I withdrew only because it was covered between Mr. Cochran and Mr. Fauché covered the end where Mr. Gobert had asked about the height and whatnot and what side of the gate we would be on, but they just covered it.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, Ms. Fletcher?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, this is probably geared towards Mr. Danny Abair or Ms. Julie Abair. They've mentioned the Brant property. What condition is that in? It looks like it's in worse condition than what we will be going for on the other side of Sector Gate. What improvements would it need?
Right.
You know, dirt, bringing in dirt or whatever, just to make it above. And,
Most of that site has not been previously impacted compared to the site that we are looking at here. So therefore, you would have to get a 404 to 408 permit and pay mitigation. If it's freshwater marsh or bottomland hardwoods, it's going to be $50,000 plus per acre just to mitigate for the permit. Fill, we would recommend that the site be filled to at least +3, maybe +4, which is what we recommend that this proposed site be filled to, would be an additional cost. But my primary concern with all of those strips that are parallel to Highway 90 there is the private property issues that we see popping up all over the state. Even if a current landowner indicates via letter that they have no objection to you accessing their property, if that property is sold or that person is deceased and an heir would come before you and have concern or opposition, we have a huge can of worms that I hope in my lifetime is resolved in this state, because it's a big problem. But as it stands right now, it doesn't look good for public access to private water bottoms. That's why I think the state land office letter that we got that indicates that the Bayou Verret is a public water body and cannot be gated or disputed, I think is a huge thing. Plus the other issue is that it is on the unprotected side of the sector gate, like most boat launches are. If you look at Bayou Signet in Jefferson Parish, right down the road, that is on the unprotected side. The parking is on the protected side. Bonneville boat launch, Williams Boulevard boat launch, the launches that we have at the end of the spillway near the Wetland Watchers, that's all on the unprotected side. In Grand Isle, I can go on and on. Most of the high-volume boat launches that are used by recreational and commercial fishermen are, in fact, on the unprotected side.
One more thing, you mentioned the 408 permit. This proposed site, is the 408 permit required?
We think that the Phase 1 portion may not require a 408 or a 404, but a CUP permit. It really all depends on funding. If the parish has adequate monies to put in two back-down ramps and 20 to 50 parking spaces, and we don't impact the wetland, then it would be minimal permitting issues. If for some reason the permitting agencies have a concern with the traffic or the parking near the levee structure, as we have proposed, and we have to push that further south, then those issues would arise that more mitigation and permitting would be required. So until you flesh out the permitting process, there are some unknown questions. Some of the questions Mr. Hogan had earlier, you don't really know until you get into the permitting process.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Cluley?
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to say that to avoid any semblance of impropriety, I will abstain from this vote and for the vote on the next ordinance also.
Thank you, Ms. Cluley. Any other council discussion? Seeing no further council discussion, please cast your vote on this ordinance. And this ordinance passes with Ms. Benedetto, Mr. Gibbs, Mr. Woodruff, Ms. Fletcher, and Ms. Fisher, with Ms. Mary Cluley abstaining, and the nays with Mr. Hogan and myself. Next on the agenda, we have 2017-0264, an ordinance approving the donation of servitude by Mary Keller, wife of, and Neil J. Cluley to St. Charles Parish. I have a representative from Parks and Rec to speak. Mr. Dewey.
So this is just part of the part of the road access from 90 to the property of the boat launch that you just voted on. The Cluleys have a servitude that they're donating to us. I'll take any questions. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Dewey. File 2017-0264 is now open for a public hearing. If there's anyone who would like to come up and speak on behalf of this item, please do so now. State your name and address for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Milton Alamo, Hornville. And just like you all got, this is a very interesting little map. Of course, this is a done deal, because if we don't do this, we have no way to get to this outrageously priced lease we entered into. If you look at the lease, the property on the lease that we're going through on this property, on this servitude, half of it is a servitude belonging to the levee board. We don't know what we can do with it yet. This is sad what happened this last ordinance, really is. But let's get back to that. This road that the Coolies are wanting to, for lack of a better word, give to the parish. It's not a hard surface road, I don't think. I think it's a road that's going to need some maintenance, going to need some repairs. And the most glaring part about it, it's not even in St. Charles Parish. The tax-paying citizens of St. Charles Parish is going to be asked to maintain a road in somebody else's parish. That should be troublesome. Maybe Jefferson Parish ought to buy that road and take care of it. It's going to be in their parish. And it's good to know that all, and I'm sorry they all left, it's good to know that all these gentlemen that want this boat launch, and I said before and I'll say it again, I have no idea what's the need for a boat launch, because I don't fish, I don't own a boat. But it's good to know that they're all willing to step up to the plate and help pay for it. So maybe Ducks Unlimited could pay 1 month's lease, and the CCA can pay 1 month's lease. That's what they're saying they want to do. They want to economically develop it so we can justify entering into an agreement to take over this little strip of land to get to our lease. I really hope that the Corps or someone with the federal government steps up here and says, you know, you can't get a permit to put all this stuff here. You're going to have excessive traffic going over a bridge that's built for the levee. And we're to the point in this parish, and it's sad that not many people in this parish pay attention, but there are a few people that watch this council meeting, and I'm going to ask those that watch the council meetings to tell their neighbors that while we're getting ready to decide to take on this donation of a piece of road so we can get to the outrageous lease that we just entered into, this governing body of St. Charles Parish tonight has said, we're all for flood protection, and we're all for drainage infrastructure, but just not so much. $2 million plus that could be going to our levees and infrastructure, which we're not doing now, needs to be spent. So I hope that this previous ordinance fails. Now, you have no choice but to vote this one. This is sad. The governing body of St. Charles Parish has once again let down the citizens of St. Charles Parish. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Alamo. 2017-0264 is still open for public hearing. If there's anyone who would like to come up and speak on behalf of this item, please do so now. Seeing none, public hearings closed. Any council discussion? Seeing no council Mr. Hogan.
Yeah, I hope there's no misinformation on this ordinance like there was on the last ordinance and leaving out a bunch of facts that totally skewed the position that was placed on that last ordinance.
Okay, any other council discussion on 2017-0264? Ms. Cooley.
This servitude was requested by the parish. They already used this road to access the sector gate, but they wanted it formally. So that's why this is in front of the council.
Thank you, Ms. Cooley. Ms. Perrier?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just so we know that we've covered all our bases, I don't know if this is a question for Bobby Raymond or Mr. Hebert. Being that a portion of this is in Jefferson Parish, will we also need to follow up with maybe a COE, cooperative endeavor agreement? Something of the sort?
No, ma'am, I don't believe we will. This is a property right that is being transferred by the current owners to St. Charles Parish.
Okay.
What we will have to do is record it in the records, clerk of court records in Jefferson Parish.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ram. Any other further council discussion? Seeing none, please cast your votes. And that passes unanimously with Perrier, yes, Fletcher, yes, Woodruff, yes, Gibbs, yes. Ms. Cluley abstained, Tara Wilson, yes, Wendy Benedetto, yes, Mr. Hogan, no. Okay, next we have 2017-0265. It's an ordinance to levy an assessment on the 2017 ad valorem tax bills of